I think as we're seeing in Ukraine, literally as we speak, the emergence of autonomous warfare, which is to say, it's not a human directing, it is the software directing the hardware. And I think actually 2026 maybe look back upon in the future, and maybe for hundreds of years hence, as the year in which autonomous warfare became real.
Now, under the Defence Investment Plan that we are discussing on the show today, billions of pounds are going to be spent on new fighter jets and ships, munitions, drones and high-tech weaponry for troops. The Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis told MPs it will be the largest ever investment in artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, autonomy and uncrewed systems are no longer capabilities of the future. And through this dip, they will now receive the sustained investment that reflects their strategic importance. So today, we commit the UK's largest ever investment in drone warfare, £5 billion for strike, protector and surveillance drones across the Royal Navy, the Army and the RAF, anti-submarine vessels, uncrewed ground vehicles and fighter jets, a new uncrewed systems task force to rapidly develop and field new autonomous capabilities, and funding for Europe's biggest drone testing site, the Uncrewed Systems Centre in Swindon.
The Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis, joined now here in the studio by Lewis Mosley, the Chief Executive of Palantir UK. Hi, good to see you, Lewis.
Good afternoon, John.
Thanks for coming in. So, of course, you are a major software contractor. What are your thoughts, first of all, on the DIP, on this plan?
Well, listen, I think it's good news that it's finally out. That's something that the defence industry has been waiting for now for a long time. So that's a big step forward. And as we just heard in the clip, I think the Defence Secretary's comments and this investment in AI, in drones, is also incredibly important because, as he noted, this is the future of warfare. However, I do worry that these are still baby steps in that direction.
I mean, that was my next thought, which we do see the MOD, the Ministry of Defence, embracing tech and AI and this technology. It is the next stage of warfare. It's here now, not just in the future. Look at the Ukraine battlefield. But to what extent is this country up to the pace of a potential enemy like Russia when it comes to technical advances, when it comes to the volume of production?
Well, and that is the concern. So 5 billion over 4 years means a little over 1 billion a year. That's on a budget of roughly 70 billion per year. So we're talking, 1.5p in every pound will be spent on this technology. It's an important step in the right direction, but I would argue it's not big enough.
Okay. You believe then the MOD could, within this budget, the budget that was announced, make greater use to you of tech and AI and increase at the same time the lethality, the killing power of British forces? Absolutely.
And I think this is what's so important to understand about the role of the software layer. So what they talk about as the digital targeting web and the like is what multiplies the lethality, the effectiveness of the hardware, the drones, but also the old, more traditional platforms, the ships and the tanks and so forth. It's the way in which you can now use AI and the software layer to orchestrate and integrate all of these platforms. And that's what we're seeing in Ukraine.
Now, we've spoken about this very thing before, and I think the last time we spoke, you emphasised that a human being will always be the one deciding to kill an enemy. Given the speed of decision-taking in battle and the speed which AI and tech allows action to be taken on the battlefield, will that always be true?
Well, I think as we're seeing in Ukraine, literally as we speak, the emergence of autonomous warfare, which is to say, it's not a human directing, it is the software directing the hardware. And I think actually 2026 maybe look back upon in the future, and maybe for hundreds of years hence, as the year in which autonomous warfare became real. And you're exactly right about the question now we need to all ask ourselves, which is, where will that decision sit?
Yeah.
And I think in the West, we have a value system that means this is a question that needs to be resolved democratically. This is a big debate that we need to have as a society. The challenge we're going to have is these adversaries, other countries that are perhaps more autocratic and maybe racing to develop this technology against us, may not take the same view. But I think it's incredibly important that this gets resolved at that level. And It's not left to technology companies like mine, Palantir, to make that decision.
So I understand your point. This is a metaphor for decision makers, policy makers in the military and politically too, when you're drawing up the rules of engagement and so on. But in a battle, this technology can identify multiple enemies in the space of seconds and kill them in the same amount of time. How would it be possible for a soldier sitting at a console looking at a screen to take these decisions? For example, the obvious example is an enemy soldier is seeking to surrender. Well, by the time it takes an enemy soldier to put their hands in the air or wave a white handkerchief, they're going to be dead.
Yes, and this is the big challenge that we need to contend with. These are, as you said, new rules of engagement. New rules need to be written, and I think it's a whole of society debate.
All right, now here's another question which relates to that. So, when it comes to noting, recording the performance of technology in battle, is there always going to be a very clear audit trail which marks the role of the tech and the AI and the soldier, I don't know, pressing the buttons, pulling the levers? When the time comes to review the performance of a soldier in battle or a piece of equipment in battle, will there always be a clear record of which or who was doing exactly what?
Yes, and I think that's perhaps one of the more positive aspects to the emergence of this technology is, unlike previous wars where in the fog of war decisions were made that had life and death consequences, and often these decisions would be wrong. People would make mistakes, they wouldn't have the full context, or they were tired, or they couldn't see the full picture, or indeed the munitions themselves were very imprecise. During World War II, bombing raids across Germany or the Blitz or in Japan were highly indiscriminate. Many civilians died. With this technology, you can be much more precise, but crucially, as you say, you can have an audit trail, which is to say you can know exactly what information was available to the individual making the decision at that moment. And then any reasonable person can go back, review that context, and make, if you like, an informed decision on whether that mistake under those circumstances was a reasonable one for someone to make.
Look, your firm, and obviously you'll be happy about this, it's very good for Palantir's business, but you're very integrated now into the UK defence machine, to the point that the firm, you could argue, is becoming literally indispensable. Now, does that create a problem? Good news for you and your profits, clearly, but does it lose the power of the MOD to take decisions on whether to change contractors or change the way that it operates AI? If you are so deeply woven you cannot be unwoven, then suddenly you are the one with the whip hand.
No, I think the MOD is well, certainly in our case, very good at contracting for this, and they have the whip hand. The challenge, however, is, and I think maybe this is really the big word that we're hearing bandied around a lot at the moment, is sovereignty. We're ultimately a US company. We're headquartered in America. We have an important presence in Britain. 1 in 5 of our employees are here. We make a lot of the product here. But there is this question of, if we're not a British company, can the British Ministry of Defence be absolutely certain that it has full operational control over its use of our software? And that's where we have been through an exhaustive process to ensure that that's the case.
All right, just a last question. Palantir is so woven into not just this field of government activity, but many, and it's controversial in some cases, as you know. We've talked about the complaints about Palantir being involved with the NHS. There are some who don't like that. They say on ethical grounds, you say it's an unreasonable judgment. That one goes on. Meanwhile, you've had a falling out with the Mayor of London, who feels that Palantir is too deeply woven into operations in London. How do you juggle these different conflicting positions with different parts of the state as a company? Does one not compromise the other?
The way that we see it is we are here to help the most critical institutions in this country be the very best version of themselves. And as this technology, particularly artificial intelligence, is emerging, they are all going to need to grapple with this. They're all going to need to take advantage of it, and it will transform public services for the better. And sometimes this is, I'm accused of, well, how can you be both serving the armed forces and the NHS? Is there not a fundamental conflict between those two? I think not. This is about supporting public services, whether they're in uniform of a nurse or the uniform of a soldier.
All right, Lewis Mosley, Chief Executive at Palantir, thank you so much.
Thank you.